sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show wishing you an undetectable viral load. I'm Christy Powell. My co-host tonight always makes safe sexy. Welcome, Bianca.
Hello, everybody. It's good to be back.
Good to have you. And our guest tonight is an HIV case manager, advocate, and artist, Cynthia McDonald.
Hello, everybody.
All right, you guys. We are going to be talking about something kind of heavy today, but also from all the sounds of it, something kind of hopeful too, actually. If you are interested in contributing to this discussion, sharing your story, or asking Cynthia a question, because we love it when our guests get attention, feel free to call the show at 512-991-9242. Or if you're abroad or at your computer, feel free to type in tiny.cc/callsex to get connected to our call screeners toll free. And it says here in the notes, or whatever. So I guess we're super excited about you.
Or whatever. Yeah. Whatever. Well, yeah, we hope to hear from you. I suppose it is a little bit of a heavy topic, but I think that there is a lot of optimism to be had here. Let's get into it, I guess. Cynthia, with more than 2.5 million COVID deaths in just the last year, I think it's really easy for people to forget that that's not the only pandemic that we're all currently coping with on a global scale. There have been more than 30 million people who have died from HIV/AIDS in the last 40 years, not to mention the countless lives that have been impacted. How are we doing globally in this fight against HIV?
Oh, well, sometimes it just kind of just depends on what country that you're in.
Sure.
As far as like, how we're doing on the large scale. A great thing about HIV is HIV/AIDS is that we have amazing treatments that's available to people right now where you can be able to get your viral load to undetectable status to the point where you cannot pass on the virus to another person that you happen to be partnered with. However, because of a lot of different barriers, including stigma and how that looks from place to place, we're still not really able, I would say, like on a global scale, to actually get this pandemic to the point where we can equate people to zero. And and the thing about it is that people who are living with HIV can actually live very long, productive, and healthy lives. But because there's still so many myths that are perpetuated, about HIV, who and what type of person would get HIV, sometimes, oftentimes, that can create a barrier that would keep a person from being treated. So I would definitely say that, like, in the United States itself, like, I know there's a lot of different initiatives as far as like, being able to get people from zero to get people to zero. And I know that there was a lot of different administrations as of late that actually put more money into HIV treatments, HIV science, and also studies to make this happen. However, we're still seeing like different upticks in infection, even in the United States itself. And also, it's kind of interesting too that you're even seeing more of an uptick in infections in different parts of the United States, especially in the South. And an interesting thing also too is that depending on the community itself, oftentimes like more poorer communities, more marginalized communities are very much so susceptible to infection rates. A lot of it has to do with, non-access to care, lack of resources, and even lack of really, the education when it comes to what HIV is, how it can be treated, how it can affect you, etc. Even like, I would say like the uptick mostly as far as like infection rate goes It's the highest. It's between Black MSM and Black women.
Hmm.
And so it's like we have still a lot of work to do as far as like being able to completely eradicate this disease and
Sure.
infection rates.
Yeah, it's not entirely unlike COVID in the sense that there are huge disparities depending on the population that you're looking at and the demographic that you're looking at within a particular population. I know that a lot of folks, when we start talking about HIV, are probably having flashbacks of the Reagan administration and Clinton and the quilts and these different things. I don't know that people are maybe aware of how big this still is here in the States, but also how much things have changed in the past 20 years. How has our understanding of the virus itself changed and evolved in the past couple of decades?
Well, definitely, I would say like the biggest game changer. Well, it's two like game changers I can point out to as far as like historical reference goes when it comes to HIV. Uh, Before in the 1980s, like late 70s, early 80s, when people were starting to come down with this particular disease, it was mostly white gay men. And then we started to, and so like oftentimes what was espoused about this particular disease was, oh, it's just a gay disease, right? Like
Sure.
a gay man disease. But what was like a big game changer is like when a young man, a young boy named Ryan White actually became infected with the disease. And he was infected by blood transfusion.
Mhm.
So that, and he became like a huge HIV AIDS advocate and actually got like, a bunch of different celebrities to actually, advocate with him. And you start to see more money being poured into science and studies when it came to this particular disease to show that doesn't matter what your sexual orientation is, any person can get this disease if they are exposed. And oftentimes like the main ways that you're exposed is either through semen or through blood. So you would even see people who are even happen to be like substance users who use needles. They were
Mhm.
prone, especially if they're using dirty needles, right?
Hmm.
So once that happened, as far as like I would say like I think that he got infected, I want to say in the late 80s. And you start to see more of a and then also too like there was ACT UP as well, which was another
Yeah.
organization that actually like brought a lot of awareness when it came to HIV and AIDS. And then like once we actually saw that this is something that is can happen to any person, that's when you saw more money from the government actually being put into studies. And um and then the next thing that was like a game changer, because like at that particular time, if any person was infected with HIV, they oftentimes would have to take treatments where it would consist to like 20 to 30 pills a day.
Sure.
Mhm.
But when we actually had a breakthrough when it came to HIV treatment was in the 90s when we saw the Proteus treatments. And what they ended up doing was is combining the capabilities of previous antiretrovirus treatments and into single pills, where people who
Mhm.
were newly infected or even people who were legacy patients were able to lessen how many pills that they were taking a day exponentially. I
Mhm.
remember one training that I went to a while ago where we got a chance to actually speak to HIV patients who've been living with the disease for 20 plus years. And
Wow.
one guy kept repeating this because he still was like in shock and awe. He said,
Mhm.
I used to take 26 pills a day. Now I'm down to 3. Like that is like, and he said it like 3 times. And we just kind of just stood back because like it was kind of like he was still like ingesting that idea of not having to be chained in a certain way to taking all these pills in order to stay alive.
Yeah.
So yeah, so like those are like it's so now we're to the point where a person living with HIV, even if they're newly infected, can be on an ART or antiretrovirus therapy, where they're only taking one pill a day and can still achieve a undetectable virus load so that they cannot transmit it to a partner.
Yeah, so just broadly speaking, what do modern treatments look like, and how has the prognosis changed? Because I know that when these things you were discussing first came out, the idea of living with the virus for 20 years was not seen as a viable option, not seen as realistic.
Mm-hmm. So like what I was just saying before, it's like far as like what has changed is that people who are living with HIV is no longer have to live under the guise of this is a death sentence. It's not.
Mhm.
As I mentioned before, people who are living with this particular disease can live long, healthy, productive lives. And the reason being is because like now that we have ART therapy where you are able to have like very little to very 3 to 1 pill that you can take a day, that can put you into an undetectable load and not be able to transmit it to another person. And also there is a thing called PrEP and PEP. Are you all familiar with this?
Mhm.
I
Okay.
am, but please walk us through it a little bit. I think this is really
Sure.
valuable information for the audience.
Cool. Okay. So I will start with PEP and then PrEP. So PEP stands for post post exposure prophylactics, and PrEP stands for pre-exposure prophylactics. So and oftentimes they actually contain the same medication. So if a person who happens to think that they are probably exposed to the HIV virus can get on a PEP regimen where they have to take this particular ART regimen for like 3 days, like 72 hours within exposure to lessen their chance of actually getting infected. Now, a person who has used PEP then oftentimes is counseled about taking PrEP. Now, with PrEP, that would be a one pill that a person would take where they cannot, well, that will lessen exponentially the likelihood of them being infected if they happen to engage in a behavior that would possibly cause them to be able to be HIV positive.
Mhm.
So oftentimes, people who are and they usually have like a list of like different like people who would be more prevalent to being infected with HIV, whether and unfortunately it's still MSM, which is man having sex with men. Also, a person who happens to be a partner to a person who is HIV positive, and other people who may engage in some higher risk behaviors like multiple partners, etc., without necessarily using other prophylactics, would be eligible or would be counseled into taking PrEP. And when that happens, then they don't necessarily have to worry about like that particular portion of STIs coming towards them as far as HIV is concerned.
Mhm.
Well, I know you mentioned that stigma is a huge barrier in really everywhere. I mean, certainly the states included, but in terms of receiving care and treatment, I know that stigma's got to be a huge barrier. What about cost and maybe some of these other considerations? What are some of the other maybe targets or things preventing us from being able to take on this challenge on a global scale?
Right. Well, stigma is, I would say, is like the highest
Mm.
because there's always some type of stereotype or trope that has been attached to HIV. Like, and especially like if a person who happens to be, MSM that is still like in the closet, they definitely, and they may be more prevalent to actually keeping those things in closed circulation, right? So that would cause them, even if they're like if they're even further at risk because of, sexual behaviors or what have you, they won't come out to say that, okay, I engaged in this. And so they probably won't get treatment, because they're just always afraid that, oh, somebody's going to, call me this, or, somebody is going to, think that I am, going to hell or whatever, like a lot of these things are still, a big thing. And also too, there's still a lot of miseducation when it comes to who is who if a person actually gets HIV and how they got it. I remember reading stories about, specifically on the continent of Africa, in some villages where if they some people actually were saying that, like, if you have sex with a virgin, then that would cure you of HIV. You know, and like I saw, actually, no, it's not. It's the only thing you're doing is just spreading it.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate, that oftentimes that this is a thing. Also, too, like, I don't know if you guys ever heard of he was a guy back in the day. His name is Dr. Sebi. And Dr. Sebi had a wild claim that he actually cured 13 people of AIDS. And he said that he did it using an alkaline diet. And as much as I believe in healthy eating, and I'm plant-based, that is not going to stop you from getting infected with HIV or even cure you of HIV.
Mhm.
I had a patient who decided to go that particular route, and they almost died. It wasn't until, like, we had to get educated and say, like, no, this is, you need to take your medication. You need to take this. It's going to save your life.
Yeah.
And they were at the point where they had full-blown AIDS. But once they got on the ART treatment, they were able to suppress their viral load. Their immune system accentuated itself, or asserted itself rather, and then they were able to, be healthy. So, so it's a lot of big barriers. And also too, like, as far as like cost is concerned, um, there are programs that are called PAPs, or patient assistant programs, that are oftentimes from the federal level down, and even in some pharmaceutical companies, where patients who have barriers, income barriers, or lack of wealth barriers rather, are able to get into the program so that they can get their medications for little to no cost. Because oftentimes, without insurance or without those patient assistance programs, like, ARTs can cost a lot of money. I know one that's cost like over $3,000 for a 30-day prescription, which is insane, but it is a thing, right? So, like, if you have a person who has like no insurance,
Yeah.
and also has, like, very little resources to get this medication, they're at risk to actually be succumbed to this disease. So it's a good thing that, we are having like more government buy-in, making and also pharmaceutical buy-in, to making sure that, HIV and like lack of resources would be a less of a barrier, so that people can be able to get their medication and live their lives.
Absolutely.
Well, the parallels are pretty striking when it comes to the impact of misinformation and how much that can exacerbate a pandemic. I mean, we're seeing that in so many ways right now. So I know you mentioned some upticks here in the States in certain demographics. I'm interested to know what trends we're seeing right now, or maybe what there is to expect here in the States.
Yeah. So like, some of the trends actually show, like, of course, like, in the 80s, there the most infections were, like I said, gay MSM, or I'm a white MSM rather. And then, as we traverse time, we saw more of an uptick amongst African American MSM and also African American women. And now what we're seeing is even a higher infection rate amongst this particular group. And a lot of it is from in the South. Now, I remember I was actually in a training yesterday where we were actually discussing Black MSM and HIV. And, we talked a little bit about religiosity and how
Mm,
this thing can actually be very much so a barrier for people being able to get tested and treated because they're afraid of what that
yeah.
looks like to them. And of course, the South, that's the Bible Belt, right? So, you still have a lot of people who are not out about their sexuality because they're concerned about how their family would be received by them. And also, too, like if they have like a community that happens to be church, they'll be concerned about that as well. And so if they're doing a lot of their sexual behavior under wraps, and not necessarily being able to be out with themselves so that they're not even getting like the proper information or even
Right.
the proper protection or what have you, they're at high risk. And it's unfortunate that we still have these particular I call Western sensibilities that are very, very much so a yoke on folk when it comes
Mhm.
to especially when it comes to this disease.
Yeah, I hate to think about the influence of religion here, and the influence of all these pressures against science and the stigma against the queer community, and just the simple reality that people are dying because of these unexamined beliefs. I really appreciate you being here with us and just helping to kind of shed some light on where things are now and the importance of taking this and any pandemic very, very seriously and from a skeptical and scientific point of view. That said, let me toss it over to you, V, and let you jump on the phones and anything else that you wanted to add here.
Absolutely. I am very excited about this conversation just because it's not something I've seen talked about nearly as much as it should be, just in to the general populace, which is where a lot of the stigma is coming from, right? A lot of
Right.
the issues around this. The people with HIV understand probably some of these things at this point. It's everybody else who needs to get educated and actually like jump in there and, battle that stigma that they are perpetrating purposefully or otherwise. So I'm very excited about tonight. Thank you, Cynthia. We do have a caller on the line, Deborah from Oregon, who is a healthcare provider and wants to discuss with you how much the healthcare response has changed towards HIV. So let's talk with Deborah in Oregon. Deborah, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I have to say, first off, totally off topic, but I don't know what to call it, Cynthia, but your headdress is just amazing.
Thank you.
So the main thing when I saw the topic today, I just remember when I started my career as an EMT or a paramedic, it was very much in the beginning of the HIV outbreak. And I remember being so affected by the fact that I don't know what major city it was in because my memory isn't that great, but I remember a man needing help, needing EMS, and no one would go and help him to the gurney. And there was a bystander who literally walked over, gave him a hand, and helped him walk to the gurney so that he could get the medical treatment that he deserved. And that's where I grew up in medicine. I saw that stigma. Oh, you can't do this, you can't do that. Dear God, if you breathe the same air with somebody who has HIV, you might get HIV, because we just didn't know enough.
Yeah.
And now, as a healthcare provider, I see that HIV is just one piece. It's one piece of the human being or the patient that I am treating. Yes, I have to take some precautions, but I need to treat the whole patient, the whole person, not just his HIV. And I think that's the biggest thing that we have seen change, is that we've now acknowledged that there is more to a person than just their disease process. And like I said, HIV is just one thing. And Cynthia, you have said so much in the last 15 to 20 minutes that I totally agree with. How amazing is it that before, when you were taking all your HIV medicine, you would get so nauseous that you would throw it all up and then have to start all over again from 26 pills to 3. That is amazing to me. And the other thing that you touched on that just blew me away is the It's unfortunate. It is absolutely unfortunate in one of the richest countries in the world that economics actually affects the availability of treatment.
Sure does.
Because I love him. I'm going to use an example, but I am a huge fan, have been since I was a little girl, but I love Magic Johnson. Okay? Magic Johnson is HIV positive, but I have to ask the question, would he not have converted all the way to full-blown AIDS if he was just a regular black man? And that scares the crap out of me. It does. And he is very big on educating people and bringing this stuff to the community. But, you know, and then again, you touched on another thing that I have to say is it's a stigma. And it shouldn't be a stigma. Because I don't care if you're gay, if you're white, if you're black. I don't care. I want you to get treatment. I want you to be healthy and live the best life that you can live. And that's the thing that I wish we could get over as far as HIV treatment. That's the biggest thing. I wish we could really put that out there and say it doesn't matter. Unfortunately, it does matter because people bring religion and their thoughts of their family into it. But you know, I really hope that people see it's only one part of who I am. Because being HIV positive is no longer a death sentence, and you need to live your very best life. And I wish in every way that I can that I could be an effect when I'm treating somebody. If you're HIV positive, okay, whatever. I have to wear appropriate PPEs no matter who I am treating. It does not matter if you're HIV positive. I have to protect myself. And I just feel like there's such a stigma too. I wish that other people would jump on board and say, hey, you know what, that's a person. That is just a person. And it's just part of their medical history.
Right.
Well, it sounds like you're doing a big, you're doing your part there, Deborah.
I love that.
It's awesome. Thank you for calling in and sharing
I try
that.
really hard. Okay, thank you very much.
Shows.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, this might not be. Yeah, no, it's beautiful to hear. While kind of terrifying at the same time. You know, this might not be a fair comparison, but COVID literally is a disease that you can get from breathing the same air as somebody. And yet, even in the early stages of this pandemic, I don't remember that being the narrative or that being the anxiety among the interviews with EMTs and things along those lines. Like, certainly I heard anxiety and fear and, you know, nothing but compassion and concern for the medical providers that have been really, really struggling through all of the stress and strain of this year. But more to the point, I feel like because HIV so early on was labeled as a gay disease, that stigma has just never come off and has always been a piece of how we talk about this concern. And that breaks my heart a little bit. Like, I'd like to think that we live in a more modern world now where people are just in general more compassionate or aware of these things, more scientifically minded and everything else. I can't say that that's true in any kind of meaningful way.
Did you know you can't catch COVID if you have the right vibration frequency? I heard that online.
Oh, wow. What vibration would that be? Like, how many megahertz do you have to be vibrating?
The vibration of life and not of COVID. I don't know.
I don't know.
But yeah, I think you're spot on there, Christy. It's always, if it affects the other, then somehow it at once is not as big a deal, and it is also blown out of proportion, right? Like Cynthia was saying, it only started getting the attention of government funding when it was revealed that anybody could get it, right? When it was confined to, well, they're not like me, so I'm fine. All of a sudden now it's like, oh, actually, you know, maybe we need to do something about this. But it also was demonized in a way that other viruses have not been. And we're seeing the same with COVID in a way where we're saying, well, why aren't people taking this seriously? Why isn't our government taking this seriously? And you look at the breakdown of who is actually dying from this virus, and it is the quote unquote other, right? It's communities of color that are being most impacted by this. And suddenly you're like, oh, okay, well, that might not be the full reason, but it's certainly a large part of it. Again,
I mean,
that we can push away from ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, we were talking before the show about how in one day, our governor here was speaking about how it was time to reopen the state and how it was safe to reopen and remove mask mandates and different things. And then a few hours later, posted some incendiary comments about illegal immigrants bringing COVID into the state.
Like,
It's that other.
hours.
It's always the other disease. It's never our disease.
And
And
the second it is, all of a sudden we're
then
sick.
it's something to be cured. It's something to be taken very seriously.
Yeah.
Othering is such a thing, especially when it comes in this particular realm. Like oftentimes that we have seen, whether it be HIV, whether it be COVID-19 or any other diseases, that oftentimes like marginalized communities are always going to be hit the hardest, and a lot of it is because it's the resources are not going to be there to combat it in a proper way until it hits home, right? And it's always going to and when it hits home, then it's going to be like, oh yeah, we need to do something about this, like now, because it's at your house, right? But the thing about it is, it's like your neighbor has been on fire for a minute and you ain't gave him a bucket yet, so what do you say about that? And that's unfortunate. And even speaking of, like, I wanted to go back to something that I believe the healthcare provider Deborah said.
Yeah.
When she was talking about, like, HIV is just one part of me, but it's not all of me, right? So I'm not my status, right? I just happen to be myself who is living with this particular disease. And and also too, like that whole thing about like transmission, even though, like, I would say that I would say by like the 2000s, like a good amount of people were still much more educated on how you can and you cannot get HIV. But you still saw people actually perpetuating bad information, bad tropes. And I remember specifically when I was a Christian, being in church, and another parish practitioner of Christianity in the church with actually became HIV infected. And they were also living in the closet, even though like there was murmurings and rumors, like, yeah, that's what they are. But at the same time, because again of the fear of being ostracized, that they kept it to themselves. And then when they became to the point where, yes, they are HIV positive, and to the point where it got to, full-blown AIDS to them, and they actually had to hurry up and get like treated. I remember it was said all over the pulpit, such and such has HIV. And, and this is what God does when you are not practicing his word, and you leaving yourself into the temptations of flesh, and etc. etc. I mean, but the worst part about it was, there was a nurse that ended up getting up after the pastor, because the pastor called the nurse up and got up and tell them how you need to deal with such and such, and they said, well, you can't hug them, you can't kiss them, you don't even shake their hand, and I'm like, you're a nurse. I mean, at that particular time, I was just a college student, but still, I was like, you can't get HIV shaking a person's hand or giving them a hug or, anything like that. Why would you say that? Like, you're a whole medical professional. You should know better. And, and then when the person came back after they got released from the hospital, because their immune system was still kind of compromised. And if you were saying don't hug them because of that, fine, but that's not what you guys did,
Right.
And then after that, the person infected started to say, well, God has delivered me. And let me tell you, I was sleeping with pastors, and I was doing this, and I was just doing that. And I mean, just like this completely continuously like feeding into this bad well of information. you know, and just making the stigma even worse and worse and worse and worse.
Mhm.
And I mean, like, and just this thing, and I just think about that particular person, like, you can't even be your true self being here, you
Yeah.
know, and because you could not be your true self, you're even living with this dis-ease now, right? You know, because like you had to do everything under wraps, and I bet you possibly wasn't really even educated enough or
Right.
told enough, like, you know, how to protect yourself when you are, you
Oh
know.
yeah, because the Christians are very, very good at sex education in general,
Oh yeah.
right? Like
Oh,
they've
definitely.
got
Yeah.
that covered.
Oh yeah, perfectly, you know. And it's so unfortunate that that we're still dealing with this to this very day.
Yeah.
Like, you know, are in these particular, you know, religious organizations like that some people go to, and especially if they have like such a, you know, a line about if you are, you know, if you're heterosexual versus if you're homosexual or what have you, and like, and if you're homosexual you're going to hell and this, that, and the third, you know, so they can't even talk about, you know, proper, you know, healthy sexual behavior, you know,
Right.
because, you know, because God's going to frown on it, and it's unfortunate.
Well, I mean, to draw this to a recent event, I guess you'd call it. So has anyone else, Christy, Cynthia, have you seen the Facebook page for Sci 10 Bruggencate and what's going on there?
I have not.
Okay, so
No,
do you
not
guys
familiar.
know? Okay, so Sci 10 was a an apologist, a precept. He's debated Matt Dillahunty and a bunch of other people. He's, you know, kind of obnoxious. But, you know, he's an apologist. What are you going to do? But what he posted something essentially on his Facebook page saying, I have been found, I've realized that I'm guilty of moral failure and I am turning myself over to my church. I will no longer be allowed to be in a public sphere. So no preaching, no apologetics, no speaking. I'm giving them control of my Facebook. I'm giving them control of I'm deleting my social media. Essentially, he was announcing that he was going to be disappeared. Like, he was just like, okay, bye. Like, I am gone. And he's like, if you have questions, you can reach my church at this address, but like, I will not be talking with anybody. And it was like the setup to a horror movie, first of all. But it was also this idea that, okay, well, what happened? And everybody seems to be like, okay, well, it sounds like it was like some kind of sexual scandal or something. But we have no idea if this is like something where he was actually like abusive and a predator, and something where the church is now helping him cover this up, because that's not an apology, right? Like, if he actually hurt people, that's not sufficient. But at the same time, it could be something like, I'm gay, in which case I feel a lot of sympathy for him, because that is treated as something equally bad in a lot of these churches. And so when all sex, everything about sex, especially that correlation between being LGBTQ plus and or being somehow a sexual predator or an abuser, is all lumped together, it really makes it difficult to advocate for yourself or for other people, right? Like, it's like, okay, well, do I get mad at this person? Am I worried about this person? Do I feel sorry for them? I don't know, because you just said it was a thing, and that's the blanket kind of umbrella term, and we're supposed to just say, okay, well, I guess we're never hearing from this person again.
Wow, that's crazy.
Very, very
Such
strange.
strange goings on.
It's
Yeah.
so weird. And like, I really hope, like, I hope he hasn't like hurt anybody. Like, I really, really hope that nobody was injured by this man,
Sure.
even though he's like bad in other ways. Still, like, I don't know. It's again, it's that inability to talk about things realistically or from a place of solving an
Causes
issue.
very real problems. Yeah.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. I mean, even think about it.
Well,
Like, I was. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was gonna move us to the next chapter. Please finish your thought here.
Oh no, I mean just like to your point, V, about the person who sounds like that they've been disappeared, like all of a sudden like the men in black just came and swoosh you away.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean like I was even just reading about like a very prominent priest that's here in the city that I live in, where
Mm.
they were accused of sexual misconduct with and it was two brothers that came forward first who say that they were sexually abused by the priest, I want to say in the 70s.
Mm.
And they were getting a lot of backlash because, like I said, like this, the priest is very well known. And
Right.
then there was another allegation that came forward about sexual misconduct. And, and I'm just thinking to myself like that oftentimes when you look at clergy specifically, that you had people back in the day that actually escaped to these particular titles in order to cover up what they felt was like sinful behavior,
Yeah.
original sinful behavior, right? And to the point where like even though that they happen to be under this particular title or in this particular seat, that it did not cure them per se of anything.
Yeah.
They're still who they are, and then all of a sudden, like I don't know. It's just like a lot of times that again that people would still be so constrained for not being able to be their true selves, that all of a sudden, because like when the true self comes out, it's a problem, right?
Yeah.
you know
Absolutely.
yeah, but go ahead.
Well, no, I mean we've been talking around it in a lot of ways. The importance of just getting this information out there and feeling comfortable having these kinds of conversations. You've already kind of pointed out. We understand now that anybody can get this virus. We understand how people get this virus. What are some of the other maybe dated assumptions that you can help clear up for us about the way people used to view this or used to understand it that we now simply know isn't true?
Right. Well, one of those is that, again, there's still people who think that you can get it like if someone coughs on you or touches you or hugs you or even gives you a kiss. No, you cannot get HIV that way. If you're in the same, presence as a person that happens to be living with HIV, you still get people that cringe. And I've seen it, like if a person like reveals their status, and then next thing you know, like other people may get like sincerely like closed off and get very
Yeah.
tight, because they're not really sure if I don't know if I should be in the same room with you. Like,
Hmm.
no,
Hmm.
it's really okay, you can be. um and also like again like um eating alkaline foods and, going on like a strictly vegan diet and stuff like that, that does not cure HIV. It does not. Matter of fact, there is no cure for HIV. Even though like we came a long way as far as like how to treat the virus or to getting to the point where you're not able to pass it along to another person if you become undetectable. You you still are I lost my point of thought. Oh, sorry. Like even if like that's the case, like there's still no magic pill per se,
Yeah.
right? There's still no like you take this and then you don't necessarily have to worry about HIV ever again. This one time and it's done, right? Um, and also too like there's still like I said like a lot of like misinformation, especially when it comes to how a person gets it versus like how a person can keep it from going to another or et cetera, et cetera. um like I told you, like that whole thing about like having sex with a virgin, no, that's not cure you from HIV. Vice
Sure.
versa, no, it doesn't cure. You can't go to a shaman. They can't go mecca like a high, make a honey ho, and then get you away from HIV. That is not going to happen, and I would definitely say like oftentimes like if people were more concerned about being in an environment where they would be more at risk, to, speak with their healthcare professionals about what can I do to lower the risk factors in order for me not to get HIV. There's so many different ways, and it's not just condoms. Like
Mhm.
I feel like the condom conversation is played out. Well, if you used a condom, you wouldn't have to worry about the HIVs, the AIDS, no, I mean, because condoms can break, you know what I'm saying? They help, but they're not like a full preventative. So, oftentimes, like, people need to be more educated as far as like all the different ways that you can protect yourself, including using PrEP. Including if you feel like you have been exposed rather early, getting PEP, including regular testing. That is a wonderful way
Yes,
to
Yeah.
actually be
absolutely.
able to, to help as far as like, if you're probably been exposed. There's rapid testing that you can do in a doctor's office. And there's even like, I know that the clinic that I work for and like other places that we partner with, we'll go to clubs and test people.
Hmm.
And have a rapid test right then and right there, less than 20 minutes. If you got if the virus is detected or not. And then right then and right there, they give you resources on where to go in order for you to get treated, and even get you hooked up with a person like myself
Nice.
to offer
Sure.
you support.
Absolutely.
Well, what are the risk factors that we should be aware of then? I mean, if there are all these different ways of preventing the virus, what should we be on the lookout for as a way of avoiding spreading?
Well, there are certain like different like risk factors as far as like mostly like behaviors, right? So people who use like substances as injectors, that can be a risk factor. Being that oftentimes if a person is an injector as far as like their substance use is concerned, sometimes they don't always do it by themselves, right? They may do it in groups, and they may share needles. So if they share a needle with a person who happens to be HIV positive, that's going to increase their risk factor in order for them to get infected. So that's one. So like oftentimes like you will see like needle exchange programs where people can bring in like dirty needles and then be able to get clean needles in order for them to engage in more what we call like harm reduction, right?
Yeah.
So that way, one of those particular risk factors may not be as prevalent. Another risk factor, oftentimes for people, is anonymous sex. So, like, oftentimes, like, if they are, want to engage oftentimes with people who they don't know, as far as like, sex is concerned, there is a possibility, especially if you don't have a prophylactic, that you will increase your risk of getting HIV. So oftentimes, just to combat that is that, we would tell a person like if you are engaged in a particular behavior, or even if like a person like even engages like in group sex, like anonymous sex or group sex, that no matter, and this is regardless of sexual orientation.
Right.
If this is a risk, if this is a behavior that you engage in, you should get on PrEP. You should get tested often, and you should get on PrEP in order to again lower your risk factor of being HIV positive.
Great. Well, I know that we've got a number of calls coming in, so I want to give V a chance to get that pulled up. But I want to make sure to ask you beforehand, what should we maybe know or just notice about how these conversations are changing? We've highlighted a lot of the differences of the last 20 years, but I'm curious about that stigma and just sort of the general social strain, and just the way that these conversations are hopefully getting more comfortable. But I wonder if that's really what you're seeing.
In some cases, I am. As far as like you're now seeing like, especially like in media, advertisements for PrEP. For to so that you can direct a person in order to get treatment for that, and also telling them about different patient assistance programs, so that your economics is not going to be a barrier in order for you to get on said treatment, right? And then also too, like you're seeing more people being open about talking about sex and then how they engage in sex personally.
Yeah.
And I even know that like when I'm speaking to patients, like I want to make that very clear to them. Like, if you're speaking with me, please don't feel like you are going to shock me or you are going to
Right.
make me squirm or, squint or squish or whatever. Like, you can tell me pretty much anything, like including the Powerball numbers, but that's neither here nor there. I am more interested in your health, not judging you, right? And I think that is one of the main things that I'm starting to see erode as far as like bias and judgment when it comes to having conversations around sex and sexual behavior as it relates to HIV. However, it's still not enough for me, and because again, there's still this stigma out there about who's more prevalent to getting HIV than who's not.
Yeah. I'm curious, do you feel like there might be, because the initial stigma I think was tied very closely to stigma around homosexuality and same-sex sex. And I'm wondering if you think that as we destigmatize being queer, being anywhere on that LGBTQIA spectrum, will the conversation around HIV and AIDS also like lose some of that stigma?
I truly believe so. I think that like oftentimes if we can normalize sexual orientation and gender identification and where a person may be on that particular spectrum, then what's also according to the stigma for HIV will start to erode exponentially. Just like you said, this used to be HIV, AIDS is a gay disease, period, and then it used to be if you were a woman, like that was happened to be same sex or same gender loving, you were also considered higher risk, but actually that's not really true. So that had to be again a point where we had to educate people on exactly how you get this disease and what are the studies saying about who is infected as far as like risk factors, right? But oftentimes, like if we can get to the point where we can normalize these things, like we have, yes, if people are gay, they're gay. So what, right? If people are trans, they're trans. So what? Can we get? I'm looking for to the day where we're getting past labels on people, especially when it comes to their gender identification and their sexuality. They are humans first, and who they are and what they do is none of your goddamn business.
Fair to say.
Absolutely. So we do have a couple of calls if we want to jump in. We have Jonathan on the line from Alabama. He wants to talk about the disaster that is sex education and its culpability in HIV transmission. Jonathan, welcome to the show. How can we help you tonight?
Thank you, V. Hi, Christy. Hi, Cynthia. How you doing?
Hi there, John.
Howdy, doing all right. Good to hear from you.
Good. Well, you did hear that I was from Alabama, so as far as disastrous sex education goes, it doesn't get much worse than Alabama in the United States. We compete for bottom in education in general in the first place, and as far as sex education goes, they're not even required to give it at a high school level. They're not required to give it at all.
Wow.
I mean, I just ended up pulling up some statistics on that, and it's they require children grades 5 through 12 to receive some instruction on HIV/AIDS through a health education program, but not in conjunction to sex education. And I don't know how you
do you
break
do
those two.
Yeah, how do you talk about it sexually transmitted? Yeah, I hear that.
How do you do that? Yeah.
Without further stigmatizing people with HIV, right? Because then you can
100%.
hug them or kiss them, like, ugh.
That's crazy.
Absolutely.
That's insane.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bill in place to require sex education to be medically accurate and remove language pertaining to self-control and ethical behavior regarding that, and emphasize the discouragement of risky behavior and remove the requirement to teach that homosexuality is not an acceptable lifestyle. And the fact that we have a bill like that in 2021 is not great. We had some bills in the 2020 legislative session that unfortunately failed. So yeah, Alabama's terrible to queer people.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, I mean, that's not exactly breaking news. I suppose the question becomes, what is the solution here? What is the strategy? I mean, I know that that's an impossibly huge question. And for the folks who are watching this show and participating in this conversation right now, I know at least part of the solution is to actively combat the misinformation and the problematic belief systems of religion and to challenge those things in a public discourse. But ultimately, I don't know about you, V. I can't help but feel like no matter how many episodes of this show we do, the world is just scary and shitty in a lot of ways. So what do y'all's minds turn to as opportunity or solutions to even chip away at these things?
Well, I love what Jonathan said about making sure you're aware of what bills are being passed, making sure you're aware of what's happening in your state and local government, right? Making sure that this is, because these things seem like they're far removed from you, especially if you're not in high school anymore. Why should you care what's happening there? But like all of this has direct impact, not only on your nation, but your community and ultimately yourself. And so I think, Jonathan, what you're doing, being aware of what's going on, aware of which bills are passing and which are not, signing petitions if you need to, donating where you can, like all of this is very valuable, even if it feels like a little bit and maybe not enough to stem the onslaught. A lot of people doing a little bit can really help.
Yeah, I agree. And I will also say that, Jonathan, I would also get like other like-minded people galvanized around these particular bills, and tell them, get in contact, with their state legislature when it comes to, what they want to see as far as like how we're teaching our kids in school when it comes to sex education. Because like, yeah, you as you mentioned it, like, how in the world do you talk about HIV and you don't talk about sex?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't understand that. I mean, like, it's insane that you can feel for some strange reason that you can separate the two. You cannot, especially when a lot of transmission comes through sex. Period. So like it's important for folks to be informed on how this thing can happen, even in this particular way, how to protect themselves in when it comes to sex, and also don't be afraid to talk about it. And that, when you were even talking about the bill, kind of reminds me of what Dr. King said. He said you can't legislate morality, but you can regulate behavior. And and even like with that means that policy is important. I feel like this is a Wednesday show, but policy is important in this particular case, because you want to make sure that government is doing its part in order to helping remove a lot of the stigma. And a lot, and government can, especially really making sure that church and state are separate, like that. Religiosity, and even especially like when we're talking about sex and science and things of that nature, that should not be something that is an influence when it comes to school. It just shouldn't be. Like, I'm not going to demonize a person if they want to go to church. If you want to go to church, that's cool. But when it comes to when we are in school and we're talking about science, and especially when we're talking about this disease and sex and things like that, we need to be leaning more on what's empirical versus what's inspirational, and I wish that was something that was espoused more often. But yeah, you're doing the right thing, and yeah, galvanize the troops around supporting this bill, and making the legislators pay attention so that they can support it as well.
Yeah. And that's especially hard in Alabama, especially in the rural areas. We have schools that entirely ignore the church-state separation, and will actually have pastors come in to act as coaches, as speaking in the auditoriums and stuff like that, and end up actually giving sermons in school. Like it
No
happened
doubt.
when I was a
Yeah.
kid, and I found out from my niece and nephew that it was happening at their school, which they tell me about it again. When it happens, I'm going to get not recovering from religion, Freedom from Religion Foundation on them.
Good. That's what I was going to suggest. Reach out to them.
I'm prepared to file a report.
Good.
Yes.
Well, Jonathan,
Also,
it sounds like
also-
you're doing a lot to educate yourself and the people around you and just kind of be a watchdog, like that concept of just being somebody who is aware of what's going on so that when this information does come your way, and it will because it always does, you are able to accurately represent, no, actually, this is what's happening and here are ways that you can help. The fact you're doing that, you're already doing more than a lot of people. So thank you so much for calling in.
Mm-hmm. Well, you can only do the good that's in front of you.
I like
Sure.
that.
Indeed. Agreed.
All right. Have a good night, Jonathan.
Well, thank you so
Thanks
much.
so much.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we do have another caller. Do we want to take one more?
Yeah. Who else you got for us?
Perfect. Okay, we have Brian from Utah, and Brian is calling about sex education, sexual shame, guilt, all of those things. Not necessarily HIV related, but I do want to take this call because I think it ties in well with everything else we've been talking about. Brian, welcome to the show. How can we help you tonight?
Hi, I'm so stoked to be here. I am a fairly new listener, and I am a recent former Mormon. Within the last year or so, I've left religion. I also was divorced in that time, and I'm mid-30s, cisgendered man. And anyway, I'm just looking for a little bit of help with delayed ejaculation issues. I am dating someone, and I feel like I'm back in my adolescence, where I'll feel guilt and shame creep in with sexual experiences and have a hard time coming. So anyway, I wondered if you guys could help educate me on that sort of thing. And I know I need to probably just be gentle with myself, and that it's been decades of indoctrination. But anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. Well, I can empathize with the idea of you're in a sexual situation where you're doing something that you've been told is probably bad, and you're like, oh, I did not develop these skills enough. I feel like an awkward 13-year-old. One of the first times I went out with a woman, I was like, I have no idea what to do. I am feeling very weird and guilty and just unsure of myself, and it did feel very much like, oh, I have not gotten up on this bicycle, right? Like, this is not something I have done in a long time. So I totally feel that, especially paired with the deconversion process and dealing with all of that indoctrination and looking at it for the first time as what it is. That's a whole lot. So I'm glad that you are aware that you should be gentle with yourself right now, because you should be. This is not going to be fixed overnight, but that's okay, because it doesn't have to be, and everybody does this at their own pace. So as someone without a dick, I think that's as much specific information that I can offer. But Christy, I'm curious what your thoughts are here.
Yeah, no, I almost want to just play your own words back to you, Brian, because I think that you already have a sense of what you're up against here. I want to say quickly, just congratulations on making those changes, on getting to this point in your life, and also remind you that, oh my God, you are just now arriving here. Why should you expect to have it all figured out and have everything laid out? You know, I don't want to at all be dismissive of what you're struggling with and how you're feeling through all of this, but I want to remind you that delayed ejaculation just means that you're not orgasming at the moment that you want to orgasm. And I think the challenge here is in changing that moment, changing that expectation on yourself, or that idea that you're supposed to orgasm at a particular time. Sex doesn't require orgasm to be incredibly fulfilling and meaningful and satisfying. And I know that can seem like I'm saying, well, you're just going to have to deal with it. But I sincerely believe that if you remove your ejaculation as the goal of sex and stop worrying about the sex that you're not having or the sex that you or the way that sex should look, and move to this place where you're actually enjoying sex as it is, enjoying the sex that you are having, regardless of when or if you ever actually reach orgasm, that things will naturally start to develop a rhythm. Things will naturally start to fall into place. And a lot of these concerns will evaporate without you having done much of anything other than just enjoy yourself along the way. How does that resonate for you?
Yeah, no, that's super. I appreciate it. I do feel like I'm, such an efficiency-oriented human that I get frustrated when my conscious mind and my subconscious mind don't link up exactly.
Yeah,
Sure.
that is a
But it's
thing. I
been,
feel that.
been so
Yeah,
much.
I feel that. I
Yeah.
can I
Yeah.
just add one more
Yeah.
thing, if it's okay?
Absolutely, Cynthia. Go ahead.
Oh, the only thing,
Love it. Yeah.
yeah, just a couple of things. I know kind of what helped me as far as like even my deconversion journey was recovering from religion. I did
Mm.
call a couple of times, and also I looked at a lot, and they have, depending on like what you're going through, they have a plethora of resources that you can use in the toolbox to help you, with your situation, and including like, I love that they have like the secular therapy project where you can actually, get hooked up with a counselor that can kind of help you through some of these different things. And I think that also too, as a person who has also come out of religion, who was very much so had like certain expectations when it came to sex, including like, even like, when it comes to masturbation and, loving myself, that, oh, that's bad, that's this, that's that. And it took a while for me to kind of stop using those as expectations.
Mm.
So once I got to the point where I stopped putting expectations on what this should be, it became more enjoyable. And it's kind of like allowing yourself to just enjoy the time, enjoy the journey, enjoy the road, and how that looks is going to be different for everybody. And even if it's not to the point where you want it to be right now, like Jonathan said, like V said, that's okay. You know, I think that like oftentimes we constrain ourselves with these particular expectations, especially when it comes to sex. And and sex can look so many different ways, including sex with yourself. So enjoy it. Enjoy what you're feeling. Enjoy what it can do for you internally and externally. Just do and I'm not gonna say to stop thinking that way. No, you can't do that. And it's more so just like, again, just like I'm going to, it's kind of like you have to, you can learn how to do what like a lot of us like talk about as mindfulness, which is, observe the comings and goings of thoughts without judgment. And I know that is very difficult to do. So I would encourage you to find a way to not to be curious about this journey that you're on, and just be observant about this journey you're on in all aspects, and see where it takes you.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. I thought that mindfulness would be, a key ingredient of things for a while, and for whatever reason, it's been difficult to, I guess, get started on that process.
Yeah.
Although most of the meaningful spiritual experiences I've had in the last 5 years have been in yoga. So
There you go.
Oh,
Yoga.
Yeah.
Insight Timer is
calling out
also a
that,
really good. Insight Timer is a really good free meditation app that has guided meditation that I have been utilizing a lot of recently. So I'd check that out if I were you. And also, before we let you go, Brian, I do
Super.
want to emphasize the idea of communication with your partner as well. Because I can tell you from personal experience, I have been with multiple men, this sounds weird, multiple people with penises who have deconverted and have been forthright from the get-go. Like, I have had sex once with this guy, and I still remember it fondly, even though he was like, so just so you know, I don't have a easy time coming, and I probably am gonna have to like jerk off after we have sex, but I want to have sex with you. I want it to be awesome. I want you to come. We had sex. It was awesome. And then he, finished himself off and we were good and we went to bed, right? Like, it's totally okay to expect your partner to be open to this and to not put pressure on you, even unknowingly, right? If you're not telling your partner this, you might be thinking, oh, they expect this of me. When if you just expressed, hey, here's the thing I'm dealing with. Right. Here's a way that I'm going to need to get off tonight. Is that okay? If they're on board, that takes so much stress out of the situation and so much of that like performance anxiety, which ultimately is not helping things. So, I mean,
Sure.
I don't know how
Absolutely.
you have been with your partner, but I would encourage you to be forthright and to just trust them to trust you.
Yeah. Interestingly, I mean, I don't want to monopolize all of your time, but my partner's super generous. And what's funny is that in my 12-year marriage with a beautiful, wonderful human, I would find myself almost constantly fantasizing during sex. And my new sexual partner that I've been with for a couple of months is basically could be handpicked from those fantasies, if that makes sense. She's like,
well, nice.
Wow.
all that kind of stuff. But it's so wild because I'll be having sex and my mind will still be like, okay, what should we think about? And I'm like, no, dummy, like we're right here. It's really fun.
Yeah.
Like
And that push and pull tug on your focus and your presence may be part of what you're experiencing here. And I want to acknowledge that you're allowed to fantasize. That may not be the best way of engaging with your partner. That may not be the most satisfying sexual experience, but it might be a satisfying sexual experience. And that's not against the rules either. In terms of just very practical tips and tricks, I want to continue to highlight the fact that this is something that is, likely tied to some unrealistic or unhelpful expectations, and all of these other things that we've said about presence and mindfulness and all of that definitely still applies. But in terms of just sort of basic biology, I might encourage you to be, mindful of particularly things like alcohol and tobacco. Those are going to have pretty meaningful impacts on your ability to achieve orgasm. And if you are struggling to manage your own rhythms, I would encourage you to look into something like erotic meditation or erotic hypnosis, as well as just good old-fashioned jerk-off instruction videos from Pornhub or wherever else, because that type of material can give you an opportunity to become a little bit more comfortable with your own body, with your own rhythms and signals and sensations, and develop a somewhat greater awareness of what exactly your buttons are and how to get to where you want to go. While you're working on all of those things, though, I want to just continue to encourage you to be mindful, not to over-optimize, not to feel like you need to fix this or that you need to, get the 12-piece wrench set out and try and adjust and tweak and play with every little piece. If you allow yourself to just enjoy the sex that you're having, without creating a bunch of anxiety and pressure about the sex you should be having or the sex that you're not having, many of these things will naturally start to ebb and disappear.
Awesome.
Oh, we threw a lot at you tonight, Brian, but thank you so much for calling in. Feel free to call back in and let us know if you've tried some of these techniques or, how things are going. We'd love to continue this journey with you, but we will have to say goodnight right now as we are wrapping up the show in about 15 minutes. So thank you so much for calling in.
Thanks for holding space for me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Thanks,
you take
Brian.
care.
Okay, awesome.
Well, as we're getting towards the end, I know we've talked a little bit with one of the last callers about what types of things people watching tonight can really do to be part of the solution. But
Yes.
I was curious if there was anything else that you wanted to throw out here in terms of where we should be directing our efforts, where we should be directing our donations, and really even just what we should be mindful of in the way we speak and even think about these issues. What kinds of tips or ideas do you have for us?
Education, education, education. I cannot emphasize that enough. I think that, like, oftentimes, if we can encourage conversation around educating people about this particular disease and transmission and how it can affect you and all the things, that is going to be so great of a tool to be able to remove a lot of stigma that's
Mhm.
around it. Oftentimes stigma is perpetuated when people don't know. you know
Yeah.
so I it's so important. Like, I know that, like, that's one of the first things that, like, we in different clinics that, like, um are are known to treat infectious diseases, especially HIV, is to have health educators to talk to them about the disease. And especially, like, when a person is newly diagnosed, like, the first thing that we want to do is, like, offer them some counseling that's around it, to let them know that this is not a death sentence. You
Yeah.
can live a very healthy life. And I would also encourage people to do your own digging. The CDC's website has a whole section just on HIV, on treatments, on transmissions, on statistics, on just about everything that you want to know about HIV is right there. And it's a really good resource. And also, um, get involved as far as, like, donating to, local AIDS foundations that, help put more money into research, and also patient assistance programs where people would be able to access their medications without inhibition, right? They don't
Mhm.
necessarily have to be so concerned about, I don't have enough money, or I don't even have health insurance, or et cetera, or all the like, because that is a thing that could
Right.
be a huge barrier for people being able to get the treatment that they need. And, we just need to just continuously have these conversations around it, because HIV is not gone. It's there, it's still very much so with us, and it's going to continuously be with us for a while. But if more of us kind of garner to, getting educated, and also supporting efforts in getting to zero.
Yeah.
The latest is called U equals U, which is undetectable means untransmittable, right? And so that is the thing that we have to continuously talk to people about, so that we can get to the point where we're getting to zero, and we don't have, and this disease can be eradicated if we do it together.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned the CDC's website. We've also talked about recovering from religion. I'm going to, in particular, mention the recovering from religion forums, in part because we're going to be talking about those next week, but also the forums at recoveringfromreligion.org are a great opportunity to have anonymous, if you need it to be, conversations about these topics to try and remove some of that stigma and to try and be just a little bit more comfortable with our bodies and comfortable with reality as it is. What other kinds of resources or books or just recommendations would you have for folks that are wanting to understand more about this?
So I was actually looking up, like, some of, like, the one of some of the best books that's, like, out there that talks more about HIV and the fight against HIV. And I actually came up with five.
Nice.
So, and hopefully, like, people can actually take a look at these a little bit later. One is called The Plague by Albert Camus. The other one is called The Coming Plague by Laurie Garrett. Another one is called and the band played on is called Politics, People, and the AIDS Epidemic by Randy Schultz. So that one more is like a historical reference as far as like being able to kind of see like where we were and where how far have we have come when it came to HIV and AIDS. Plagues and Peoples by William McNeill. And the last one is called The Invisible Cure, Africa, the West, and the Fight Against AIDS. That's by Helen Epstein. And that, I need to read that one myself. That is, and that's, and because I touched on it a little bit earlier about, how the HIV and AIDS is still so prevalent in on the continent of Africa. And one of the things that I've noticed that the uptick of infection, especially on the continent, you see also an uptick of these religious organizations around Christianity and evangelism, and now you even have like more prosperity pastors that are coming out of different parts of Africa. Yeah, so sorry, V. It's unfortunate, but it is a thing, and so yeah, so so again. It would be that's a pretty good read in order for people to kind of like learn how unfortunately we still have so much work to do to eradicate this particular disease, and again it comes with knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll make sure to get that collection of books from you, and make sure that we have that included in the show notes to this episode. So if you didn't catch some of those names or whatever else, we'll make sure to have some links and details and resources and everything else attached to this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the last thing that I would say, I have not studied HIV specifically, but I have encountered a lot of this was not new to me because of books and TV shows that I have consumed where it was dealt with in very impactful and nuanced ways. One book that I would recommend is Agenda by Linda Hirschman. It talks about I've recommended it on the show before. It talks about the gay rights movement from the 1940s to Prop 8 in 2008 in California, which is when the book was published. And it does talk a lot about AIDS, a lot about the HIV epidemic and how the government responded or failed to for a lot of that. It talked about the ACT UP movement. It talked a lot about how the lesbian community stepped in and really fought for the gay community. It's a beautiful book, beautifully written, and it does have a lot of that history there as well. Also, if you want to watch some fiction with some compelling characters, I just finished Pose for the second time, cried my eyes out.
Love Pose.
Cried my eyes out, Googling frantically when is season 3 coming out. It is probably one of the best shows on Netflix, certainly the best one Netflix has ever produced. And it deals in a very nuanced and just dramatically just heartbreaking way around this and around the history of it. So not necessarily where it is right now, but rather kind of where we came from and like what was going on back in the 80s and 90s. So if you're interested in good TV that also deals with this topic, that's an option as well. I do want to make sure we thank the crew before we head out today, because they have been doing some epic work behind the scenes. Look at that crew cat. Oh, I see another tail. I see a second cat. Is a second cat going to be in the shot? Yes. Look at that ginormous cat. Oh my goodness. Right, seriously.
It's a lot of cat.
It's a lot of cat. It's a BFC right there. All right. Thank you guys so much for being here today. Thank you for educating me a little bit more on the subject, Cynthia, and our viewers as well. We really, really appreciated you coming out here. Give us your links. Where can people find you? What are you doing? How do people get more Cynthia in their lives?
Oh, wow. That's great. Okay. So that's my link tree.
That is the most professional photo I have seen on this program yet. Oh my goodness. That's good.
Shout out to my my job that hooked that up. So yeah, thank you, job. So yeah, that is my link tree that has all things. Cynthia, as far as like where you can find me, I jump on a lot of different places in YouTube. So I do even have a link to like all of my YouTube appearances rather. I am also a regular on a nonprofit, so that's a Sunday show. So check
Yeah,
that out.
Cynthia is officially an ACA host as well. That's
Woohoo!
Yes, and also too, like I do also write a wealth and wellness blog called ADOShealthandwellness.com, which I talk about the social determinants of health that's adjacent to people who descend from chattel slavery. And so again, all that stuff is my link tree. Thank you. And also, I want to thank you all for inviting me on and having this conversation, and you know, and all the callers, and just being here. It's been really great. And again, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for taking the time and talking about this important topic. If you want access to more important sex-related topics, especially if you live somewhere like Alabama where you're not getting it elsewhere, feel free to reach out to us. We have a email, the sex@atheist-community.org. We also have a voicemail box that you can call and leave a voicemail message if you want to be on the air on the phone, but you know, for whatever reason can't call in. That's 512-666-0ASK. It's 512-660-279 or 75. Which one is it?
75.
75. Don't call 79. Tell whoever is on the other end your sexual.
Very confusing
That would be
conversation,
very
but maybe a fun one. I don't know.
We also are available on things like our Facebook Secular Sexuality fan group that is moderated by fans for fans. There's some awesome questions and conversations happening there all the time. And we also have our Discord where people jump in and have those awesome conversations on voice chat or on video chat as well. You can find that at tiny.cc/ACA Discord. And you can buy merch. We have merch at bit.ly/AEN merch. You can get, look at those sexy mugs and shirts and pillows and stickers and all of those cool things. So if you're interested in supporting us as we do what we do, feel free to support us by donating to our Patreon, by buying some merch. One of the ways, not to shill terribly, but one of the ways to help get the news out there about these topics, to help further education, is to help the ACA do what they do in the progression of church-state separation. All right, Christy, I'm going to throw it over to you for the outro.
Yeah, I mean that's a mouthful, and that's what he and she said. I guess this is a good moment for us to encourage everybody out there safely and without any pressure or stigma or anything else attached to go ahead and give themselves a big old orgasm. Or, better yet, give somebody else one.